I've been high. I've been high. Lately I've been high.
Hi everyone, it's been a very long time since I've actually made a video with my voice, I suppose. I think at this point it's probably been a couple years, so it's definitely been a hot minute. And so there is probably going to be a lot of talking here. I imagine this is probably going to be a long video, so I will try and leave timestamps timestamps for each point of the video in case you want to skip around or go over something again. I would like to have this be something that's easily digestible for you, but I guess we'll see how that goes. So I thought up the neat idea for a puzzle that I wanted to make, and the idea behind the puzzle is not really anything new, I suppose. It's essentially just pressing 6 buttons in the correct sequence. The player gets a note earlier on in the game and it tells the player what buttons to press on the puzzle. I did make a really cool UI to go along with it, which you see here. And so if you are around my age or older, you probably grew up with these VCRs. In the US at least, they were the mainstream predecessor to DVDs. And I actually know that there were a couple of home video systems between VHS players and DVDs. Like Laserdisc, and there were some other ones I can't remember, but for the majority of people in America, we had VHSs and then DVDs. And after DVDs, of course, there was Blu-ray and then digital, but that's not relevant, I guess. So anyways, we called our VHS player a VCR, and VCR means video cassette recorder, but hilariously our VCR, it didn't actually record, it just played tapes. So I suppose we should have called it a VHS player, but anyways, moving on. So I made these images, the ones you see on screen here, by remixing a couple of VHS images I found in the public domain search on the Wikimedia Commons. I will link to that in my description below, and I'll also link to my itch.io page where you can download this project file. Not this one specifically, just the code for the VHS puzzle. You can use that however you want, because I got these images from the Wiki Commons, so same rules apply there. It's in the public domain. If you want to credit me, you can credit CallMeKerrigan, but it's not required. And so the idea of this puzzle is that there's a tape jammed in the VHS player, and you have to press the correct sequence of buttons to unjam it and get the tape out. I know it does not work that way in real life. Don't do this if you have a jammed VCR. This is a game, it's fiction. It's set in a supernatural world in some sort of purgatory, so I hope you can understand that the rules of reality, real life, don't apply. So for the actual puzzle, I did need a little bit of help to figure out how to do the eventing for the button sequence. So I googled RPGMaker button sequence puzzle, and I found this tutorial by Shaz. So thank you, Shaz, for this tutorial. It helped a lot. I'll link this tutorial down in the description below, because if you want to make your own button sequence puzzle and just don't want to use these pictures, this tutorial will probably be more of a help than this video will be. Here is what the completed project looks like. I know there's kind of a lot going on here, but anyways, even though I made this in RPGMaker MZ, you can use it in pretty much any version, I think. The only thing, because you don't really need any script calls or plugins or external code for this. The only external thing you're going to need are my pictures, which I've provided, or you could make your own. Also, you just need some common events, variables, switches, loops, labels, and then show picture. I know that sounds like a lot. I'm really sorry. Just stay with me. So I have two project files that I released. There is the RPGMaker MV project file and then the RPGMaker MZ project file. And it's only those two because it was really easy for me to copy the data of the events from the MZ project file into the MV one. I do have all of the other makers, but I'm really sorry, I just didn't I didn't want to manually type in these events. So if you're using an older RPG Maker and you want to do this, you will just have to follow along with the video as much as you can and manually do these events yourselves. I'm really sorry, guys. Moving on from all these events, you are going to make a new project. You don't have to make a new project. You can build it into your existing project. I just like to do a new project when I'm experimenting because I'm afraid I'm going to mess something up. But that's just my thinking. You don't have to think that way. So, let's name the project something like VHS Puzzle. Yeah, I already have a VHS puzzle. Obviously, I have a finished one, so I guess I'm just going to name this VHS Puzzle 2. And so let the program import all this junk. What we're going to do first of all is these are the PNGs I already uploaded to Itch.io without the project file. We're going to copy all of these and paste them into the project file here under Documents, RMMZ, the name of the project, image, and then pictures. So they're all here now. You can make this puzzle event in a map event or a common event. You can paste it anywhere you want on the map in an event like this, or you can go to the database and then common events. I prefer the common events because I just think it's easier to work with. You can call it from anywhere on the map if you decide later on you want to put it somewhere else instead of copying and pasting the event. Just, I don't know, my personal preference. And so I am going to do this event in two parts. First, I want to focus on the events that go into animating this puzzle and are therefore more cosmetic, like the animation, the tint, stuff like that. The second part will focus on the variable that will be manipulated and the check to make sure that the correct sequence of buttons have been pressed by the player. So the second part is something that you don't really see on the screen. It's more behind the scenes, but that's, it's what makes the puzzle work. Let's start by naming our event. I'm just going to name my main puzzle. You can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So the first command here is just going to be a tint, and this is just for cosmetic reasons. So I'm just going to dim the screen. You can do it whatever you want it to be. You can set it to whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to do this. There. And I have the duration set at 60 and a wait. So it's really quick. The second command is going to be our show picture command right here. And this picture will be number 1, meaning it's going to be on the bottom. So, right here, it's the VCR base. And I just leave all these other things normal because when I made these images, I made them the same resolution as what my game is going to be. So I don't have to change anything. I have them positioned exactly where I want them already. So I made everything easy for myself. Picture number 1. And so that means that that base is going to be on the bottom because we're going to have some stuff showing up above this. If you have other images on your map, like you have like an HUD or you have scrolling clouds or whatever, you would want this picture to be above those. So for example, say you have 4 pictures already on your map, you would want the VCR UI to be at the top of those, so you'd want it to be picture number 5. And that's how it is in my game. There could be an HUD on the screen or there could be a flashlight at one point, so whenever I call this event from wherever in the game, I'd want the VCR image to be on the top of all that, because that's what the player is going to see. They don't want map effects on top of this. It'll mess everything up, This is a brand new project and this is our only picture that's going to be here, so it's going to be number 1. And I am going to go over the picture layers right now before we dive into the next part in this event. So there are going to be 4 total layers. There's going to be number 1, obviously, which is the space right here. And then picture number 2. Let me pull up the actual, yeah, you see right here. I took a screenshot of Photoshop because my computer is not, it doesn't like to screen capture a whole bunch of applications running at once. So I just have a screenshot, I'm sorry. But so number 1 is the VHS base. Number 2 will be the cursor surrounding these buttons. Number 3 will be a picture of the animation showing when the button is pressed. And then lastly, number 4 will be this text right here, which you can't see it now because this is a picture, but it will be scrolling. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a message box. I'm sure you know how to do this, but I'm going to add this just to provide some instruction on what the player is supposed to do here. After this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be adding a wait command. And the reason I'm going to add the wait command is because I want there to be a brief pause between when we actually open the event and when we check for input. Because I noticed that sometimes the game will actually take input that was just pressed by the player within the past few seconds as what it's supposed to be doing right now, and we want the code to catch up. I hope that makes sense. What I'm going to do is create the labels for all of our possible button choices. So these labels will come before the loops that we're going to add soon. So the labels are pretty important because depending on what keystroke is pressed, we want the player to move around up or down throughout the event. And so these labels will allow us to do that. And so we have our power button. Let's call this on. No, let's call it power. It'll be quicker to type. And then we have our play button. So really quickly, I'm just going to add all these buttons here under the labels. There's the stop button, and then we have eject, and then fast forward, and then rewind. And so next I'm going to add one more label. It's not a button, but it is important. This label is what happens when the player presses the escape button, and I'm going to call this in puzzle. So in total we have 7 labels. So what I am doing now is corresponding a number to each of these 6 buttons, and I'm just using the comma event to add these, just so for the sake of following along. The power button is number 1, play button is number 2, stop button is number 3, eject button is number 4, rewind button is number 5, and fast forward button is going to be number 6. As these are comments, they don't really do anything themselves in the event. They're just for my sake to help keep track of what the corresponding numerical value is going to be for these labels. This will become more important in the second half of the event. Just know that these buttons are going to eventually have a corresponding numerical value, like an ID. This is going to be a really long event, so what I'm doing now is just kind of organizing it. I'm using the comment event to separate the different sections of this event. This is totally optional, but I recommend doing it just so you can see the different parts. So now as we're moving on to essentially coding the what happens when the player presses the key buttons, I just want to mention that you can really start the cursor by default on whichever button you want, but in my mind the power button is the first button right here. In my mind it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know if you see it that way, but that's how I'm doing it. So you want a cursor by default so it shows the player there's something to select. if you show a picture with nothing really selected, it may be a little jarring, right? So we have our power button label right here. It doesn't do much of anything right now when you follow the flow of the event up to this point. It just, you have the text box and then you have all these labels. What we want is to add a check for which key the player is pressing. And we want this check to run over and over, essentially forever, until the player presses something. So we are going to add a loop. So inside this loop, we're going to have a check running forever, checking what buttons are being pressed by the player. So just think about what buttons the player could press. Obviously, they're going to be pressing the keypad. They're probably going to be pressing enter to select one of the buttons, and less obviously they're going to be pressing the escape button. Perhaps they don't really need to be there yet. So what I'm doing right now is just copying and pasting all the different conditional branches there could be. Up, down, left, right, escape. There should be 6 in total by the time you're done here. And you want to make sure that all of these conditional branches are inside of the loop, not outside of the loop, because remember, the loop is going to be checking these inputs for as long as you want that loop to be running, so essentially forever. There is one last thing I'm going to be adding inside this loop. It's also a conditional, but instead of checking for a button input, it's going to be checking for a switch. Here I called it clear puzzle. And we want this if there's a reason that we need to clear the puzzle, which a good reason would be is winning. If the player wins, they want this entire puzzle gone off the map. And because our check for winning is going to be in another common event, we can't break loop from other events. We can only do it from this one inside. Into the loop, there is something I need to do, and first I'm going to add another comment here just to further separate the top and the middle part, just because I think it's easier for myself. We need to add a show picture command right under the label but before the loop, and this is show picture number 2, which is the cursor highlighting whichever button we have selected. In this case, it will be the highlight around the power button, and remember this is going to be layer number 2 because this is going to be on top of the VCR image. I just want to mention here that where you position the comment really doesn't matter. Personally, I do want it above that show picture command because I am associating that numerical value with that label. I hope that makes sense, but again, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to make that clear. One more command we'll be adding here is another wait 5 frames command. This wait will happen after the label but before the loop. So just to reiterate again, that wait command, it's for allowing the code to catch up. We want the wait there before we start that loop where we check for button presses. Now that we've got those 2 commands done, I'm just going to jump into these button conditionals, and I'm going to pull up this picture to show you really quickly. But remember, we're going to be starting here on the upper left power button. And so the loop is going to be checking for input here when we're located right here. Kind of think about what would happen if we press up or if we press left. There's nowhere really to go. So let's go ahead and code for that possibility. So starting in the up conditional branch on the inside of it, I am first adding a wait command that will last for 5 frames, just like all the other wait commands are. I am also going to add a play sound effect, which it'll play a buzzer sound. So if the player attempts to go up, that sound will play and you can't really do anything at that point. So this is all that I'm really going to need in that up button on the inside of that conditional branch. And when you think about it, these lines of code, they'd actually be the same if you were to press the left button because you can't go anywhere. So what I'm doing is if you click that first line in the code, press shift and select the second line, right click those 2 lines and then press copy, and then you can paste it into the inside of the left conditional branch. And so before I go any further into the tutorial, I hope you actually notice that these 2 lines of code under both the up button and the left button, they are identical. So there's something easier that we can actually do. I know that was already pretty easy, but I'm going to do something else instead. It's kind of a little hack, I guess. Anyways, so I'm just going to combine these two lines of code into their own common event instead, because we're going to be calling this buzzer sound constantly because we have 5 more loops at this point. So it'll be a lot easier to just call one event instead of copying and pasting these 2 lines over and over. Also, I want to mention that if we ever decide we need to make a change to these 2 lines of code, instead of having to change it inside every conditional branch, we can just do it in the common event. Something that we may want to change is the sound effect. Or maybe we want to remove the wait or add a longer wait or something like that. This conditional I am going to be coding is the escape button. The escape button is also going to have a common event, because whenever the player presses the escape button, no matter where the escape button is pressed, no matter which of these 6 loops it's going to be pressed, it's going to have the same output, which is exiting the puzzle. And there are tons of things you could do when the player escapes. It's certainly not limited to what I'm putting in this command or this common event itself. So I named this common event escape puzzle. It's pretty straightforward. So essentially the logic here is going to be that whatever gets turned on gets turned off like nothing ever happened. Following that logic, here in this escape puzzle common event, I am going to be reversing the tint that we had when we first opened up this common event. So I will be resetting the tint back to 0. You can set it to whatever your map is, but that's what it is here in this project file. And I am also going to be erasing all 4 layers of pictures. So there will be erase picture number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and I am going to place these just above the tint command. So next, what I will be adding is a sound effect that plays when we press the escape button inside the loop. It can be whatever you want, you don't even have to add one, but I like playing something that sounds kind of like a buzzer, just indicating that we have pressed the escape button and now we're getting out of this puzzle. And so just like in all of the other conditional branches, there is going to be a wait command in this one as well. It will be the same as all the others. It'll be wait 5 frames. As I said, this is really important. It just allows the code to catch up, so it's not keeping track of button presses by the player that are going to be irrelevant. I am also going to add a command to turn off a switch, and don't worry, we haven't really mentioned this switch yet. I will get to it later. I named this switch Show Text Animation, and this switch is going to relate to the scrolling text you see at the bottom of the VCR, more specifically picture layer 4. As I said, we haven't gotten to that point yet. You don't have to add this switch if you're not ready for it yet, but just know that it is going to be here in this common event, the escape puzzle one. And so the last event command I'm going to add here is controlling a variable, and this variable will be the puzzle sequence variable. That's what I named it. And so I will revisit that variable in the second half of this tutorial. Don't worry about it too much, but just know that we have to reset that variable when we press escape puzzle. Now, going back to our main common event, number 1, main puzzle, we're going to go under our if button cancel is being pressed conditional branch. We're going to go inside that conditional branch, and we're going to call that common event we just made the escape puzzle one. And we have most of what we want done inside the escape puzzle common event, but there's actually one more line of code that we have to add here. And this line of code is going to be jump to label in puzzle. And so let's actually go look at that label really quickly. So I just think this is pretty interesting. So you notice how under this label in puzzle there's no more code. When we jump to this label, it's going to essentially end the event for us because there's no more lines of code to run. it's only going to run if we call this common event again. So essentially when we jump to this label, we will be ending this common event. I also want to mention with the labels, unfortunately we can't jump to labels from other events or common events or anything like that. If we jump to labels, it has to be within this common event itself, the main puzzle one. So that's why we added that jump to label under the escape puzzle event. So I am now going to be talking about what happens when the player presses the OK button or the enter button. And so remember, when the player presses the enter button, we're actually going to show a little animation with the button being pressed. And to do this, we are just going to use the show picture command. We actually have two pictures we're going to be showing here. We're going to show picture number 3, and we're also going to show picture number 4. For show picture number 3, it's going to show the power button in a depressed state. And I don't mean in an emotional state. I mean in an actual what the button looks like if it's been pressed. And show picture number 4, it will be the text that shows at the bottom of the VCR. So when you press the power button, it will say welcome at the bottom of the VCR. So these images are going to be exclusive to this loop because this loop relates to the power button specifically. There are going to be other loops, of course. There's going to be the play button, eject button, stop button, and so forth. And so for those loops, the commands that go under the OK button are going to be different. Next thing that we're going to be adding if the OK button is pressed is we are going to be adding a common event. And this common event is just going to be essentially all the commands that run anytime the OK button is going to be pressed. So I am actually naming this common event enter button, and there will actually be one more common event I'm going to make here. And this other common event, so I'm going to call it text animation. And we have two common events here. The reason for that is because enter button, that common event, it's going to be called, whereas the text animation event, it's going to be a parallel process that will constantly loop. So this event, it's going to run for the entire duration that this switch is turned on. For this show text animation button, remember that we actually turned that button off in the escape puzzle common event. And for our enter button common event, we're actually going to be turning that switch on to activate that text animation common event. But before I go ahead and get into that, I'm going to go ahead and start eventing this sequence of code that will be in the enter button common event. And the first line here is going to be playing a sound effect. I just chose switch 2 because I just think that sounds like a button being pressed. It can be whatever you want though. And so the second line of code here will be turning on a switch. The switch will be the aforementioned show text animation switch. So this is fairly simple. You should have just these two lines of code right here where the enter button is pressed. I'm going to go ahead and go into the text animation common event, and we'll talk about what that will look like. So for this text animation event here, we want to make sure that the trigger is on parallel process, and we also want to make sure that it starts only when a switch is on, which is show text animation, because we can control this event with that switch. And so in the next line of code here, what we're going to add is move picture, and it's going to be picture number 4. Our text is always going to be picture number 4, no matter what the image file actually is. So these options for the move picture command aren't that important. I played around with them earlier and I decided that constant speed probably looked the best. The duration doesn't really matter. For the designation, you want to use the X command because I didn't want this text scrolling up or down. I thought that'd look kind of funny. I just have it scrolling left or right. And so I just copy and pasted this event. I have 3 total commands here. We have move picture to the right a little bit, and then we have move picture to the left, and then we have move picture to the right a little bit more. And so for as long as this switch is going to be on, it's just going to loop through these commands, just scrolling that text. And so that's really all that's going to be there in that text animation common event. As I said earlier, we want to make sure that show text animation is turned on in our enter button command, and we also want to make sure it's turned off in the escape puzzle command. So if you don't have that button in there, just go in there and add it now and make sure it's turned off. We are almost done with this common event, the enter common event. There are a couple things I'm going to add to it, but first I am going to insert it here where the if button OK is being pressed conditional branch. Remember, it'll be going inside of that, and I'm just going to insert it under the show picture commands right here. And all we do is just call the common event, and it will be the enter button. When I was filming this, I forgot to add the wait command, so I'm just adding that in there right now. See, when you have all of this stuff in one common event, that one common event can apply anywhere you want. So if you have to make a change there, you'll essentially be changing it everywhere. There will also eventually be a variable command that we'll be adding into that enter common event, but I will save that for the second half of the tutorial. So just remember that we will be adding one more command there, but we're going to revisit that. And so actually, speaking of variable commands, we are going to be adding one here inside of this conditional branch, kind of related to the one that will be going to the enter common event, but it is an entirely separate command. And the reason that I'm adding it now is because, as opposed to the common event, we can't make a change in one place and have it apply everywhere. So I'm going to be copying and pasting this loop in the future, and so I just want it there ready to go. You don't have to add it now if you don't want to, but I would recommend it because you're going to have to copy and paste this loop, and it'll be there for you already instead of having to manually add the event yourself multiple times. So there's actually going to be one more line of code here inside this enter conditional branch, and it's also going to be a common event. And the name of this common event is going to be called check button sequence. Right now the check button sequence common event is empty, but I am going to go ahead and put it here inside of this conditional branch because it is supposed to be there. We haven't gotten to it yet, but I am going to go ahead and add it because, as I said, I am going to be copying and pasting this loop multiple times, so I just want it to be there all ready to go. And so this is it for this conditional branch right here. We have the show picture command, common event, manipulate a variable, and then one more common event. And you want those commands to be in that order. I know the order seems a little arbitrary, but it will become important when we go to the second half of this tutorial. And so before I move on really quickly, I just want to make an observation here, and that this is most of the work is going to be done in these common events. And so I say that because pretty soon we're going to start copying and pasting these loops. And I just want to mention here that even though we're going to start doing that, our work won't necessarily be over. We're just going to go into these common events on the left side of the screen and work there. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and move on into what's going to happen when we start coding for the conditional branches for both the down button and then the right button. But before I start doing that, I'm going to pull up this VCR just so I can show you what it looks like. So remember, we're on the upper left corner, we're on the power button here. If we go down, we go to the stop button. If we go right, we go to the play button. Just keep that in mind. And so how we're going to do this is actually pretty similar for both the right or the down button. I'm just going to go ahead and start with the down button. And so instead of entirely breaking the loop, we're going to do something else. We're just going to be jumping to an entirely different loop. But first, we're going to do a wait and play a sound effect. And so what we're going to do for the wait and the sound effect, we're actually just going to make it its own common event, because we're going to be calling this common event constantly through other conditional branches. I just called this common event break loop. You can call it whatever you want. If you call it break loop, don't confuse it with the break loop, the actual break loop event. But so in this common event, what I'm doing is first I'm choosing a sound effect. It can be whatever you want. I chose switch 1. And so this sound effect is what plays when you scroll over the buttons. I added a wait 5 frames command because, as I said, you want a pause anytime under every conditional branch. You want it at the start of the loop and under the conditional branch as well. I'm also erasing picture number 2. Remember, picture number 2 is the highlight cursor. So now that I've finished that sequence of events that goes into that break loop common event, I'm going to put that common event under the down button conditional branch. So if button down is pressed, we call that common event break loop, and it runs through that sequence of events. We're also going to be adding a jump to label event. And I know I already went over this, but just to reiterate, if we're on the power button and we go down, we hit the stop button. So our jump to label event, what it's going to say is stop, because we'll be jumping to the stop loop. And I'm just going to scroll down and show you here. Here's the stop loop. There's nothing there yet, but there will be soon. And so now that we've gotten our stop button done, we pretty much already have the right button done. So I'm just going to copy these 2 lines and then paste them below the right button. But for the right button, instead, what I'm going to do is the label will jump to the play button, because remember, when we go right, we go to the play button. So I'm editing that jump to label command to say play instead of stop. Pretty much got almost everything done inside this loop for this power button. There is one more thing we're going to do here. Remember this conditional branch for the switch right here, if clear puzzle is on. This switch is going to be really similar to the escape button. We are going to call a common event to escape the puzzle and then jump to this label here. So you can copy those and paste them under this conditional right here, or you can just add them manually, and I will go ahead and do that so you can see. So I am going to call the common event to escape puzzle and then jump to label in puzzle. And so that's pretty much it here. This is what our loop is going to look like. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and test play this to make sure everything is working correctly. We only have one button done, so there's not really a lot we can test play, but I'd highly recommend doing it just because this will tell us if this loop we made has been correct or not. So if we test play it, this is what it's going to look like. And so when I went into test play, I realized that the screen wasn't tinting, and so I went up to the top of my event here and looked at the tint screen command, and I realized what I actually did here was I put a tint picture instead of a tint screen. And I don't know how I didn't catch this because I've been filming this for days and editing, and I guess I'm tired. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that and replace it with a tint screen, because if you tint a black and white VCR, it's not really going to do anything. Okay, this should be fine. And now I'm going to delete this tint picture command, and I'm going to go playtest and make sure everything is working as it should up to this point. So the escape button is working. Okay, so we're on the power button right now. If we go right or left, we can do it, but the cursor, remember we haven't evented those loops yet, so the cursor will disappear. But it works. So everything's on track where it should be. So we have this loop done. The good news is that we have a lot of the work done. The bad news is we are going to have to do this 5 more times. So from here, we just have to, what we're going to do is we're going to select this loop, and I'm going to start at the wait, and then press shift and select this loop. And then we can copy this big chunk of code, and then we're going to go down here to the play button and just paste it right under that comment. And so see, we got a lot of the work done already. We don't have to go through all this again. So make sure we're under the play button label. If you want, you can actually add a comment right here just to kind of separate them a little bit so you don't get confused. So I'm going to work from top to bottom now, and right now we are under the label for the play button. So the first thing I'm going to do here is select the show picture command. We're going to change that picture from the highlight around the power cursor to the highlight around the play cursor. And so the settings in that show picture command, everything will remain the same. It'll still be picture layer number 2. All I'm changing is the image file. I'm going to be choosing the play button select. And so after I get that done, I'm going to move down here inside the loop for the play button. I'm going to go under this conditional branch, as I said, working from top to bottom. I'm going to go inside the if the OK button is pressed conditional branch. And here I'm just going to tweak the image files as well. I'm just going to be switching them from the power button to the play button. So the first image we're going to show here is the play button in a depressed state, and then we're going to also show the play button text, which will be picture number 4. As for the rest of the event, everything is going to remain the same here inside this conditional branch. We will come back and tweak that variable, the puzzle sequence variable, but for now I'm going to leave it because that's going to be coming up in the second half of this tutorial. And so now we're going to move down to the next conditional branch. I'm not really going to change anything here. This is more just like an FYI. Remember that we want to be checking constantly if a cancel button is pressed, so that way we can exit the puzzle. So here inside this, if the cancel button is being pressed conditional, we're not actually going to change anything. We just want to make sure it's there inside that loop for the play button. And we're now going to the if the down button is being pressed conditional right here. Let's pull up this picture just so I can show you. We're on the play button. If we go down, we're going to hit the eject button. So all we need to do here is change the label from stop to eject. That's all we have to do. Now if we press the left button, we actually have somewhere to go this time. We would go to the power button. So instead of the buzzer, we're going to call the break loop common event this one. And we are also going to jump to a label. We're going to jump to the power button label, remember? Now, if the right button is being pressed, we have nowhere to go. So we delete this label, and we call the buzzer sound effect, or the buzzer common event with the sound effect. Now, if the up button is being pressed, there's nowhere to go either. And we have the buzzer there already, so we're good to go there. If the clear puzzle switch is on, it's going to be the same here as it is in all the other loops. And we're done. We have the right button done. So the play button, I'm sorry. So what we need to do is just copy this, the weight, the show picture, the comment, and then the loop. Just copy, and then we paste that under the stop button. And let's go into the stop button and start tweaking the things here as well. I'm just putting these comments above the label just to kind of separate here. So once we hit the stop label, we have the weight, and we're going to show the cursor highlighting the stop button like this. Everything remains the same. And now if the OK button is pressed, we want to show the animation for the stop button. Remember, stop button. And if we select the stop button, we want to show the text on the VCR saying stop. And now everything is good to go in this conditional branch. If cancel is pressed, everything remains the same. If the down button is being pressed, let's look here at the VCR. So if we go down, our option here is we can do nothing, or we can kind of think about, there is a button that's kind of below it here, the rewind button. So I'm actually going to make it so that if we hit down, we go to the rewind button. You can make it so it's nothing, but I might as well. So common event remains the same, and we will jump to the rewind button label. And if the left button is being pressed, there's nowhere to go. So we will delete these, and we will add a buzzer sound, call the buzzer common event. And if we go right from the stop button, we go to the eject button over here. So let's delete this. Actually, we can just change this common event to break loop, and then we will add a jump to label command, which is the eject label. And now if up button is pressed, we go to the power button, right? So let's change this to the break loop common event, and then we will jump to the power button label. And if clear puzzle is on, that's the same as it is before. Now we're good to go with the stop button loop. So what I'm going to do here is, as I've done before, just click this, hold shift down, and then highlight these next 3 lines of code here. Copy that big chunk of code, and then paste it under the comment for eject. And then I'm going to add this comment above eject, just so we can have our loop separated here. So for eject, we're going to have the weight be the same. The picture will be changed to the highlight around the eject button, which is right there. Good to go. And now if we press OK here, picture number will be the same. And then our eject button will be in a depressed state here. And then the text at the bottom will say eject. And so everything right here inside this conditional branch is how we want it. we don't make any changes to the cancel conditional branch here. Now if the down button is pressed while we're at the eject button, we go to the fast forward button, right? Because the fast forward button is directly below that. So we have the break loop common event, and then we are going to jump to the fast forward label. Now if left is pressed, we go to the stop button. So we are going to call the break loop common event, and then we are going to jump to the stop button label. Now if we press the right button, there's nowhere to go. So we delete these, and then we call the buzzer common event. And now if we go up, we go to the play button, right? So change this to play, and then this switch, the conditional, remains the same. So as before, let's copy this and then paste it under fast forward. Now for fast forward, change the highlight around the button right there. Now if the down button is pressed when we're on fast forward, there's nowhere to go. So we are going to call the buzzer common event. If the left button is pressed, we can go to the rewind button here. So the break loop is fine, and we want to jump to the rewind label. Now if we press right, there's nowhere to go. So we leave the buzzer there, and now if we go up, we go to the eject button here. So jump to label eject, and then that conditional remains the same. And then it's just going to repeat this loop until we press one of these buttons or this switch is turned on. And so now I'm going to copy this, and we are going to paste it into our last loop here, right above this comment but below the number. This is our last loop here, and as before, I'm just going to be changing these pictures from the fast forward button to the rewind button here. And now that I've been saying up, down, left, right all this time, I actually kind of feel like I'm reciting a cheat code. I don't know if you can have a favorite cheat code, but the most memorable one for me from when I was a kid was it was from Grand Theft Auto. I don't know which iteration of the game it was, but essentially you could put in this cheat code where it would make it so that if you punched a pedestrian, they would like float away. And I just thought that was the funniest thing ever. Now if down is pressed, we have nowhere to go, so we leave the buzzer there. Now if left is pressed, so we have two options here. We don't really have anywhere to go, or we can go to the stop button. So I'm just going to put here, if we go left, we go to the stop button. if we go right, we go to the fast forward button, right? Now if we go up, there's nowhere directly we could go. We could go to the eject button. So I am just going to put here, if we go up, we go to eject. And then this conditional branch, it remains the same. And we're all done actually. We've got all of our loops done. But since I have all of these loops done and all the animations done, I'm going to go play test it to make sure everything is done correctly here. So everything pretty much is working how it should be. You're able to scroll through all of the buttons, and I'm noticing that I'm able to highlight all of the buttons. So that's something you want to check. You want to make sure that when you press escape, you can get out of the puzzle. That you're able to press enter and select a button. When I was playtesting, I did notice there was a little bit of lag going on. So I'm going to exit out of this and just open up my event really quickly and adjust a couple of things. So this is why you playtest. I could not figure out why I was having a ton of lag with when I was on the play button, the picture would not show when I jumped to the power button. Well, look at what the name of the label is here. So the name of the label for our power button is power. Now in our play button, what I named it is power button. That's not what I wanted. It's supposed to be named power. So I'm just looking through to make sure I did not do any other mess ups like that. And so, as I said, there was a little bit of lag when I was using the puzzle. And looking at the code here, I noticed I had a wait before the loop, but not actually inside of the loop when the loop began. And so I'm going to go ahead and add a wait for 5 frames at the beginning of every loop, because I think if I add this, it will prevent the game from taking into account the irrelevant button presses, which is pretty important for this puzzle to work. And then so for extra measure here, I'm just going to go into these common events right here and just make sure that my wait command in all of these common events is going to be at the top of the code instead of at the bottom or the middle. This is just because I want consistency here. So after making all of these relevant changes, I'm going to go playtest my puzzle and make sure everything is working as it should be now, and that the problem with the lag has been solved. So I am scrolling through all of the buttons now, pressing enter, pressing cancel, doing everything that I programmed to make sure it's working properly. There's no more lag. You can scroll through all the buttons. It looks great. It actually, in my opinion, this is actually very beautiful. And so the good news now is that we're actually done with the first half of this tutorial. We've pretty much got everything done, which was intended to be the animation of these buttons here. And so in the second half of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is talk about what code needs to be added to this puzzle to make it functional. First, really quickly, I'm just going to scroll through this finished common event just so you can see and compare it to your own to make sure everything is correct in your own event. And while I'm doing this, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be doing in the second half of the tutorial. So we will just be using one variable, which is the puzzle sequence variable. And to manipulate that variable, we will be using this equation, which is what I got from that tutorial from Shaz that I linked much earlier in this video. To kind of explain what I'm doing here is X will be the puzzle sequence variable, while the button ID will be the numerical value that we arbitrarily assign to these labels. And then the solution to this equation will be the order of what the buttons were pressed in. So it'll be the sequence of the buttons, if that makes any sense. If you're having a little trouble following that, that's fine. I just wanted to try and explain what I'm going to be doing here. If you don't get it, that's fine. You might understand better once we actually finish this process. Starting here in the main puzzle common event, the first one, we are going to make some changes to these puzzle sequence variable commands that we have. First, we are going to add a command at the top of this event where we're going to make sure that we start this event with that variable equal to 0, because when we start this puzzle, that variable is going to be nothing. It's going to be 0. Next, I'm going to bring up something I brought up earlier on. Do you remember these comments that we assigned to the labels? Under power, there's 1. Under play, there is number 2. And under stop, there is number 3, and so forth. So what I've been calling these comments is essentially the ID of the button that is being pressed by the player. And so what I want to do is, when the enter button is pressed, I want to add a command that we add the value of that button ID to the variable we start the puzzle with. Just to make things really clear, that if we press the power button, we will add 1 to our puzzle sequence variable. If we press the play button, we will add 2 to the variable. If we press stop, we will add 3. If we press eject, we will add 4 to the variable. If we press fast forward, we will add 6 to the variable. And finally, if we press rewind, we will add 5 to the variable. If you don't have that variable command, it's the control variable event command. Make sure you go ahead and add it in now. And you want that event command to be right under the enter button common event, but before the check button sequence common event. And so remember, our goal here is to keep track of the buttons that were pressed and in which order that they were pressed in. But I just want to mention here that just adding all of these variables together isn't enough for the program to know in which order we've actually pressed the buttons in. It's not the sum of the numbers that's going to be important, but the actual position of the numbers. And so I'm going to try to explain what I mean, and if it's still a little confusing, that's alright. Just follow along and stay with me until we're done, because some things you learn better just by actually doing them. So in order for us to be able to check the order in which our buttons have been pressed, we're going to have to multiply our variable by 10. And we are going to multiply that variable by 10 before we add the button ID to it. And I'm just showing the equation here again so you can see it's important that we multiply by 10 and then we add the button ID, because the button ID can change depending on which loop we're actually located in. The button ID is isolated to itself. So we're going to multiply the variable first and then add the button ID. So order of operations here. I am going in and adding a control variable command where we multiply our puzzle sequence variable by 10. And I am adding this command right before the control variable where we add to our puzzle sequence. And so just to reiterate here, the idea is that when we press enter when we're on the puzzle, no matter which button we select, we multiply our variable by 10 and then we add the button ID to that total. I'm just going to pause here really quick to point something out. I don't know if you've noticed this, but so this control variable where we multiply by 10, we're going to have to do that no matter which button we're positioned at. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to place that control variable where we multiply by 10, and I'm going to put it inside the common event for when the enter button is pressed. And so because we're going to add it into that enter button common event, I'm going to go ahead and delete this line of code right here, and then I'm going to go over here on the left to where the common events are and go into the enter button one. And so I'm going to add the control variable command where we multiply our puzzle sequence variable by 10. And so this way, no matter where the enter button is pressed, we're going to be multiplying that variable by 10, and it's always going to come before the command where we add our button ID to the variable. Except for eventually comparing numbers, this is pretty much all the math we're going to be doing with this variable. So I'm just going to playtest so I can explain what's going to be happening here while we're pressing these buttons. So this is quite clever. So what happens is we start this event, remember, with a variable of 0. If we go to the play button and select it, we're going to multiply our variable we started with by 10. So that will leave us with 0. Then we will add the ID of the play button to that, which is 2, and our variable will now be 2. If we are to go select the eject button, remember it has the ID of 4. We're going to first multiply our variable going into that by 10. That gives us 20. And we're going to add the ID of the eject button to that, which is 4. So now we have 24. Now we're going to go over to the rewind button, and we're going to go into the rewind button with 24, remember? We multiply that variable by 10, which gives us 240. And if we add the ID of the rewind button to it, which is 5, that gives us 245. And think about what's special about that number. Well, it tells us the order of the buttons that we pressed. Remember, play was first with the ID of 2, eject was second with the ID of 4, and rewind was last with the ID of 5. So we're almost done now. Actually, what we need to event here last is a check for if the correct sequence of buttons have been pressed. And instead of adding this check for the button sequence inside of every conditional branch for the enter button in these loops, we're just going to go ahead and add it into this common event over here, the check button sequence common event, because we've already added that common event inside of our enter button conditional inside every loop. So just to keep things simple, I mean as simple as it can be, I'm going to have the game check automatically after 6 button presses if the sequence was correct or not. I don't really like the idea of someone pressing these buttons endlessly, calculating this little variable that we have into some sort of like Googleplex hell. So first, what we're going to have to do inside of this common event is check if 6 buttons have been pressed. We don't want the game to do anything if 6 buttons haven't been pressed at that point. So to do that, we're just going to check and see if our puzzle sequence variable is equal to 111,111, which is 111,111. And this variable is special because it is the smallest it could possibly be if 6 buttons were pressed, because remember our play button is 1. We are going to have one more conditional branch inside of this conditional, but first we need to decide what sequence of buttons is actually going to be the correct sequence. I just chose something arbitrary. Perhaps your combination will have more meaning. So what I chose was play, rewind, fast forward, eject, power, and stop, which would be 2, 6, 5, 4, 1, and then 3. And so I'm just going to use the comment event command right now to document the code that I've chosen, just so I don't lose it. And so then inside of this conditional branch for the if the puzzle sequence is 111111, we're going to add a check to see if our puzzle sequence is equal to the code we've chosen, which is 256413. And so for this conditional branch, we're actually going to create an else branch. You see at the bottom that checkmark box? We're going to select that because we do want the game to do something if we don't get that sequence correct. We're really close to being done, you guys. So what I'm doing here first is I am just going to put a text box inside the conditional for if you've chosen the correct sequence. I'm just putting a message box stating that we have essentially won the puzzle. You can do whatever you want. You could take this opportunity to turn on a switch that triggers a cutscene. You can give the player gold, or you can give them an item. It's not limited to just this. This is just for the purpose of showing this example. And under the else branch, I am going to be doing pretty much the same thing, just indicating to the player that they have lost the puzzle and now the puzzle is just going to reset for them. Again, you have an opportunity here to put in essentially whatever you want. It doesn't have to be this message box at all. What goes on when you either win or lose is mostly going to be up to you, but there is something here we're going to add under if the player wins the puzzle. Here we're going to turn on the switch called Clear Puzzle, where we essentially remove this puzzle from the screen or the view of the player. And this is pretty important because once the player wins, they're going to be done here, and we don't want this remaining on the map with us, right? So do you remember this switch? It should be here in the common event. Under main puzzle, it should be the 7th loop there. And I just want to kind of show you as a reminder, remember that switch, it goes through the escape puzzle event where we take everything off the screen, and then we jump to this label at the bottom where we end the code. Going back to my check button sequence event, I'm going to add one more switch here, and we're going to essentially turn on this switch indicating to the game that the puzzle has been won. I know we already activated a switch called Clear Puzzle when the puzzle was won, but I just want a condition specific to winning the puzzle because the Clear Puzzle could be used in other cases besides winning. And for this win puzzle switch, I'm just going to make a new event page where I remove that common event calling the puzzle, and I'm just going to add a message box stating that the puzzle has been won and it can't be played anymore. This is just for the purpose of showing you an example. You could pretty much do anything you want here, but I'm just showing the logic behind what I'm doing. And so going back to that check button sequence common event where we have our conditions for either winning or losing, I'm now going to talk about what happens if you lose the puzzle after pressing 6 buttons. And there's 2 things you can do here. The first thing is you can reset the puzzle and keep it on the screen, whereas the second, essentially the puzzle will be removed from the screen and you'll have to interact with an event to pull up the puzzle again. The second way, it will be a little bit more complicated than the first way, but it will also be utilizing that Clear Puzzle switch, which is why I said that that Clear Puzzle switch is not exclusive to actually winning the puzzle. So starting with the first option, I'm just going to, in this conditional branch here, if we lose, I'm just going to go ahead and code essentially resetting the puzzle. I'm going to add a fade out screen. And then while the screen is faded out, I'm just going to have it run through all of the necessary code to reset the puzzle. I am going to reset the puzzle sequence variable back to 0 because we want to start back at the beginning. Picture layer 1, 2, and 3 will remain on screen, so I'm just going to erase picture number 4, which is the text that's scrolling back and forth, remember? And I am also going to turn off the switch that activates the text animation. So I'm going to control switches, turn switch, show text animation, turn that switch off so we stop that common event from running. Next, I'm going to add a wait command. It'll be the same as all the others. It'll be waiting for 5 frames. And this is all we really need to essentially reset this puzzle, because remember the puzzle is going to remain on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and put a command to fade the screen back in. And then one more thing that I'm going to add here is just some instructions for the player, which is the instructions you see when the puzzle first starts. And I like showing these instructions because it essentially tells the player what they need to do at this point. If they don't know the correct sequence of buttons, they know that they can just press escape to get out of the puzzle, or perhaps they press something wrong and they can just try again. And so this essentially will run forever and ever until either the player gets something right in the puzzle or they press escape and get out of the puzzle. And so if you don't really like that method and you would rather the puzzle just be completely removed from the screen when the player loses, I'm going to show you how to do that. So we would just put the clear puzzle switch here under the branch for if you lose. This is a little bit complicated and it's kind of hard to explain, so you'll just have to pay attention to how I'm doing this here. Essentially, I'm just going to have to toggle a couple of switches. And I did it this way because I just thought of adding this after I had already invented the main puzzle. So inside this conditional branch, if the player loses the puzzle, we have two switches here. There is the clear puzzle switch, and I also have the temporary clear puzzle switch. And the reason we have two of those is because if we have the clear puzzle switch on and nothing else there, the player is going to open up the puzzle and it'll immediately close because remember, we're checking for that conditional inside all of our loops. And remember, the only purpose of that switch is just to get that puzzle off of the screen. The game doesn't know that we want to put the puzzle back on the screen for the player to try again. I hope that's making some sense. If it doesn't entirely make sense, that's fine. It's really difficult for me to explain that, just trust me. And I'm going to show you here how we're going to use these two switches outside of the common events. I'm going to go open up this event editor where we actually call the puzzle common event. And I'm going to make a page on top. It's going to be page number 3, so it'll be above the page where we actually win. And in this page, I am going to make the condition the temp clear puzzle condition. So that way we only go to that page if we've actually lost the puzzle and turned on that switch. And the first thing I'm going to do in this page is I'm going to turn off the clear puzzle switch. We don't want that on because, as I said, if it's on, it'll just make it so that the puzzle goes off the screen as soon as you open it pretty much. And then I'm going to call the puzzle common event. And then so the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my common events, and in the check button sequence common event, I'm going to make sure that that temp puzzle switch is turned off in the case that we win the puzzle. And the reason for that is because we don't want that page showing and calling the puzzle if we've actually already won it. And so that's it. I can't believe it. I'm finally finished. That took a long time. I really appreciate you watching this video and giving me the opportunity to teach you something that I thought was really cool. So here I just have the finished project file pulled up. I did add the second way to end that puzzle here. It's under Alt check button sequence. So if you'd like in your original common event, the picture event, you can call the alternate way instead of the original way I had. But again, thank you so much for watching. This video is pretty much over now. I just want to say happy holidays. I tried to get this up before Christmas. It didn't happen, but New Year's is coming up, so happy New Year's. Are you guys getting snow? Here in Utah, it's very beautiful right now. There's tons of snow. I love it. So anyways, see you later. Bye.
Was it the voice? Was it the fire burning in me? All of the noise turned into choirs of harmony. Left me with the pieces of forever that you broke. But since you left me alone, I've been high.